Hi, everybody. This is Tom Riddle from Virtual Intelligence Briefing. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of the VIB Success Series. Today's topic is the art and science of sales engagement platforms. And so today, we're going to learn vendor-neutral advice from our sales engagement experts. And today's focus is really going to be on the foundation, which is the principles, the behaviors, and strategies. And our follow-up deep dive on the 18th will focus on those drill downs on those topics that you tell us you're most interested in on the post-webinar survey. We're going to touch upon why sales engagement platforms, marketing and sales alignment, which is key to all of this, the marketing and sales tech stack, where sales engagement sits, to give you some context, data-driven outcomes, and sales plays, cadences, and content, and finally, coaching for success. And so today's expert panel start with Carlos Araujo, and Carlos is a director of demand gen at SoftChoice. SoftChoice is one of North America's leading technology solutions and managed service providers. Prior to SoftChoice, Carlos was responsible for revenue operations, marketing operations, and sales enablement. And has sales engagement platform experience. As important, Carlos and Theron and EJ as well started out their careers in sales, which gives them a unique perspective on sales engagement platforms. So Theron, the general manager of Greaser Consulting. Greaser Consulting helps companies ranging from small startups, some of the largest companies in the world, with sales strategy, RevOps, system optimization, content creation, and such. And interesting enough, Theron was the 7th employee at Outreach. And over his career at Outreach, as a sales executive and subject matter expert, he's been involved with literally hundreds of customer scenarios. So great wealth of information to draw on. And finally, EJ Martinez. EJ is the manager of inside sales readiness at VMware. And he's responsible for inside sales readiness, partnering with sales, marketing, IT, and enterprise application teams across VMware to execute on high priority sales initiatives. And so with that, let's start off on our first question. Theron, what is a sales engagement platform anyway, and what are some of the key capabilities?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on first, Tom. Appreciate it a lot. And hello to everyone out there. We're excited to do this webinar today. When it comes to sales engagement, I think the key word here is engagement. The way that I would describe a sales engagement platform is that if you're in sales, you've got to reach out to people proactively, right? You've got to follow up with them, and you're going to use different channels to do that. You're going to call people, you're going to email people, you're going to use LinkedIn, you're going to use different channels. And so what sales engagement platform allows you to do is it allows a salesperson, no matter what sales motion it is, whether it's outbound, inbound, whatever, you can create a sequence of touch points that salespeople have been doing for years and years and decades, right? It's sales 101. You can execute your sales process with a ton of efficiency, and think of it as like the cockpit for a salesperson to do their job. It allows you to really execute your process with excellence. So that's the way I describe it, Tom.
Thank you. And Carlos, how about you? What's your viewpoint on that?
I very much echo what Theron said, and but also then as a marketer that came from the sales path before, I used to joke around like I came from the dark side. most marketers on the call would relate to that, like as an internal joke. But as a marketer that came from the sales side, I see that everything he just said, but also as a great marketing tool. In many ways, it's what we have mentioned that initially, like more and more now with the whole concept of more than selling and more than marketing, like marketers need to start thinking more as salespeople, right? And then salespeople need to act more and think more as marketers. And a sales engagement platform is a very good tool to help that kind of a confluence. where then sales start considering more like a touch points in a more proactive and programmatic approach, as Ron mentioned, and marketers start thinking about like, hey, uh, it's just not like the traditional email marketing that we send one email, two emails, and forget about it. There are multiple touch points and so forth. So I think the sales engagement platform is a really good way to bring that new approach or the current approach into life.
And Carlos, just to drill down that a little bit more. So with sales engagement platforms, the topic of marketing and sales alignment comes up a lot. And it's so key to an organization. Is there anything else you'd like to say in that regard?
Well, sure. Like it is like when we talk about alignment between sales and marketing, is still incredible that to this date we still talk about it. And I have the feeling that we're going to be talking about 10 years from now, because even though like it is obvious and clear to everybody how it should be, not necessarily happens all the time. So having a tool like that, like which can be leveraged both by sales and in many ways as well, we call the pre-sales or the business development, the sales development side of it, which is very common. That's also what I see a lot of the marketing and sales team working very closely together to leverage something like that. Again, that should not be what makes the both team works together to work together, but it does drive their opportunity now, and it's basically like, hey, sales is going to be reaching out to more people than a one-to-one email, right? So they're going to be able to do a bit more personalization. They're going to be able to do some testing in terms of a performance of the emails, being in terms of how many open, how many click, how many respond. So as marketers, we can and should be always be tapping into that to understand what type of messaging is resonating, what's not resonating, and supporting that, by the way, to together make that kind of execution successful, but also then to complement as well. Like there is a lot in marketing and then sales can work in that, using that kind of a tool where marketing can start some level nurturing in some type of touch points, and then once it hits a certain threshold, then it gets assigned to sales that then hits a different type of a scale or cadence, and vice versa. Sales can start a conversation, and if and when it hits a certain a threshold or status, marketing can pick up that conversation and continue the nurture or the engagement without so much of a heavy touch from sales.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then Theron, so there's a ton of solutions. It's very confusing. If you look at Gartner, you look at Forrester, and you look at the sales efficiency or whatever it's called, set of platforms, sales enablement platforms. There's a ton of them. So where does a sales engagement platform fit in the whole marketing and sales tech stack?
Yeah, there's just a few technologies out there, right? You ever see that graph that shows all the different? It's crazy how many. But where sales engagement fits is that if you think about the tech stack now, you've got marketing automation, you've got your CRM system. The way I would portray it is like your CRM system is your system of record, right? It's where all of your data is, and you plug a lot of stuff into your system of record, okay? But your system of record is your CRM is not the place where your sales team needs to be executing the sales process. That's going to be your sales engagement platform. Again, that's your cockpit if you're a salesperson. They're in there, they're executing the process, and then what happens is all that data flows back to your system of record, to your CRM. And the great thing too is that your marketing automation plugs into your system of record. And because of that, there's a really great flow from marketing to sales. And so like Carlos has mentioned, like whenever that lead hits a certain threshold, right? Like you have a bunch of people attend a webinar, right? And then boom, what happens? How does sales follow up with it? Well, because of those integrations, there's a seamless flow to make sure that sales is able to reach out and follow up with that lead in a very timely manner.
Great, thanks for that. And Carlos, why are organizations adopting sales engagement platforms at such a rapid rate? Gartner talks about the fact that there's over a 20% compounded annual growth. It'll be a $5 billion business in 2025. So why is that, and what are some of the key benefits?
I love that. Like it's what everybody in sales and marketing wants. Like I think it's, as Tyron touched as well, like it's being faster way to respond in a larger scale, while still keeping some level of personalization. But ultimately, the out benefits are more pipeline, which is everybody looking for, and faster way to get pipeline acceleration, and then also supporting more deals to be closed. But ultimately, it comes down to what we are trying to drive from the marketing perspective, but also on the sales, like to drive more pipeline and to be able to be relevant to more people without having to occur the extra headcount that usually comes associated to those two. So I think that's ultimately the benefit. That's what I always try to start the conversation around the sales engagement platform around.
Great, thanks for that, Carlos. And EJ, it's interesting. I mean, you represent a super large organization. VMware is a $10 billion a year business. So why did VMware adopt the platform, growing their investment in it? What are some of the key benefits specific to organizations like VMware?
Yeah. So I think some of the key benefits are just kind of automating some things that are typically rather laborious. So if you think about kind of the industry and the space, CRMs have come so far in such a short period of time. I mean, just earlier this week we saw Salesforce acquiring Slack, right? Like Salesforce is that system of record, or CRM is a system of record, but the day-to-day operations of a sales rep that we've all had to follow, that segment of the process has been just neglected. And it's really easy to inadvertently transition a sales rep into a data entry administrator if the processes that they're supposed to follow to give the business the insight that it needs to make good decisions, if those processes are so laborious to follow, that rep stops spending time selling and they start spending time being a data entry person. Data analytics in general has come so far, and machine learning and artificial intelligence are such like hot buzzwords right now, but they're important because it's impactful. And tools like SalesLoft, tools like Outreach, these tools collect incredible amounts of data points and enable companies like ours, like anyone out there looking at these tools. It allows us to really introspect differently. It allows us to really understand what separates a good rep from an average rep. It allows marketing to understand what is working and what is not working. And all of that information is just fueling better future decisions.
Great. Thanks
and
for
if
that.
I may, sorry, Jay. Yeah, and
sure.
There is also I like what you touch about it as well, which is in many ways, it's bringing a little bit the sales role into the more 20th century kind of approach. Obviously the classic approach of sales is still about relationship. It's always going to be, but it allowed sales to build more relationships faster. I would say that way, right? In that many ways too, especially at the early stages in a sales career, tools like that can help. I'm not going to say it's a direct correlation, but I've seen it before. Allowed for a faster path within that career, especially at the beginning, where newer reps or people that start adopting platforms like that, they see the career path move a little bit faster because they hit the threshold of becoming more effective and efficient. Because we're using the data, using the learnings from all those multiple iterations, allow them to learn faster too. So the learning curve, it's shortened in many ways, and obviously the results that come with that too.
Great, thanks for that. Theron, anything you'd like to add to that about the key benefits for organizations, given your perspective, having seen literally hundreds of implementations?
Yeah, I'd say, EJ mentioned data, right? Like data is so key. So there's not only the added benefit of building more pipeline and efficiency within the sales process, but think about it, a lot of sales leaders can't necessarily tell you how they get a sale, right? Okay, great, we closed this deal. Well, how do we do it? How many touch points did it take? What did we do? Where do we find these people? There's so many questions that we ask. And imagine being able to like drill down into that and say, well, hey, we did this, this, and this, and it took this many touch points. This is the amount of time. Then you start to really understand, everybody talks about a repeatable process, right? Because if you can do something that has good results and you can do it over and over and over again, well, that's something that, you can scale. But like you can't scale unless you don't have the data. And that's what these, sales engagement platforms allow you to do, is really see what's it take to get sales, and like how do we do more of it, and like what are the things that we don't want to do anymore. Like we got to stop that because we're not getting results. Like, and if you don't have that level of insights, you're just losing.
Great, thanks for that. And Carlos, who are some of the key stakeholders in the organization? And it's interesting, taking a look at the attendee list today, we have over 150 marketers on the session. So if you could drill down and touch on that a little bit, in a little bit more depth as far as, so who is the team of people that contribute to the success, the users and the facilitators?
Good question. I think it varies from organization to organization. I think also I would say that where did the conversation about having a sales engagement platform started from. So that would drive a lot of the stakeholders there for obvious reasons. Is on the titles. The sales team usually is the most compelling one. So you have the sales leadership, the sales operations team. As Tyrone mentioned as well, like if IT is involved with your CRM, they also going to be heavily involved. The data team, that is, if it's not part of the sales ops or the marketing ops, and then the marketing team too. Those are the more traditional, the BDR, SDR, which is usually part of either the sales team or the marketing team. But then there is the peripheral stakeholders that I usually call, which can be very strong beneficiaries of such a tool. And it can be, for example, the product team or the product marketing team, right? Where they can learn a lot from those type of data that is provided, as EJ mentioned as well, from the type of iterations that they have. Like I was very constant in previous lives, and we're starting to implement that as well, where the product and product marketing team do have frequent touch points with the teams that use such tools. In order to understand, hey, what's resonating, what's not resonating. Can we test a new type of positioning? Can we try that out, and so forth? So it's literally in many ways to be considered as a new channel, like that you can have, like in a more scalable way, rather than having to go to 100 salespeople to find out about, like, hey, have you sent one email? Have you tried to do this conversation with 100 different people? You can do it in a more controlled environment as well. And have more consistent data to be pulled from those engagements and building to insights within the organization.
Thanks for that. EJ, anything you'd like to add? I know in your organization, IT is such a big component of what makes things happen, change management and things like that.
Yeah. So when it comes to content delivery, enablement, and the training around how to use these tools, we have a content steering committee. And the whole purpose of that content steering committee is to meet on a regular basis to understand, what are the future initiatives coming from marketing, from the demand generation perspective, from the upselling into our customers' perspective. What are the resources that are going to need to be created within our engagement platform? And within that group, we have representation also from sales reps themselves, team leads in different segments of the business, because if a rep gets to be part of some of the creation of that content, they're going to start to feel like, they have a little bit of different kind of accountability. So if something doesn't work, they care a little bit more because it was part of them that went into that piece of content. So if, any recommendation that I could provide is you want to involve as many people as possible. You want to get your IT team involved. You want to get your data cleansing team involved, because all of these tools, all of these things that you have to deal with, data cleansing, data enrichment, all of them come to fruition, come together with sales engagement. So each of those areas of the business need representation. And then in terms of looking at the future problems that you'll want to solve is adoption, right? You'd want to get your reps that people look up to, you need to get them involved as well, because that will then solve future problems of adoption.
Okay, thanks for that. So another question for you, EJ, and also for Carlos after that, is that, salespeople seem to see that updating Salesforce, for instance, as a chore. rather than something that'll help them make money. And it's interesting, in preparing for this session, I Googled, why do salespeople hate Salesforce? And there was like 3 or 4 pages of search returns. So, but seriously, why would this be any different with a sales engagement platform than that adherence or lack of adherence is, or natural lack of adherence is with Salesforce?
Yeah, and I remember being a rep and having to constantly disposition or accept or recycle leads that maybe would just from a process perspective, maybe there was a gap in the data cleansing. So then it turned into an exercise that I needed to do because I was being told to, but not necessarily because that process was conducive to more and increased future success. So I think it's really important from a sales engagement tool, really it automates some of the things that are laborious. For example, logging calls, right? If everything is set up correctly, now that rep doesn't necessarily have to take the manual time and apply the effort to log that call, but it's just going to happen automatically. So from a workflow perspective, I think it's really important that the processes that you ask reps to follow, all those things that you set forth are actually accomplishing increased productivity. Because if it doesn't actually help them, if they can't see why it's important to follow that step, to click on this checkbox, they're not going to do it. And there's nothing that we can do to make them adhere besides tell them, right? So the key is making sure that those processes that they need to follow are conducive to success. So long as that is true, adoption is really easy. Logging calls is easy if you're going to tell me that, if I log my calls appropriately, next month, I'm going to have 20% increased success at getting pickups. Or same goes for email opens, email replies. If I can see that, that's how you get adoption.
And Carl, thank you, EJ. So Carlson, what are your thoughts on that? Why do salespeople adopt sales engagement platforms?
Sales engagement platforms, it's and without sounding too obvious, because the goal is they're going to make them better salespeople. They're going to make them sell more. They're going to make them higher on-target earnings in the end of the year. That's bottom line. Like sales, rightly so, and that's where I usually have my sales hat. Like, what's in for me, right? Like, if this is going to be just another admin tool for me to be managing and to be just collecting data, quote unquote. So it is about showing quickly and fast and easily how much that benefits them in terms of, like, am I going to be able to get to my target, to my quota attainment faster, or I'm going to be able to blow it up, and how much more of work is that actually required to me. So it's usually, and I think in that case, in most cases, the ultimate goal is to make it simpler and easier for a salesperson to be able to produce more. And that's why I think the adoption, at least the implementation, it's a lot easier, has been so big, and the growth curve that we're seeing is going to continue. But yet, as mentioned here as well, like, I think as anything that is automated, it's about 80% of the work needs to be done like, in order to make sure that you understand what we're trying to do, how we're going to be doing that, and make sure that you put the hard work up front rather than just throw it out there. And I'm sure Theron is going to relate to this, because he's seen quite a few where people just buy the tool and forget it. Like, oh, it should be just now as salespeople sending emails and they'll figure out how to do. I think the more work that you put up front, the better you're going to get in the end, just like any other automation that comes along. And the sales team then will be we'll see that reflection. It'll be a lot easier for them to use and realize the benefits.
Great, thanks for that. And so, Theron, now that somebody's invested in a platform, how do they know that they're getting what they were promised or invested in? How do they know it works? So what are some of the expected outcomes and some of the key metrics by which you can prove that?
Yeah, the important thing is if you're buying a sales engagement or any technology, you gotta benchmark first, right? You gotta write down, like, hey, everyone knows their KPIs. You should, and so writing down, like, hey, this is how many meetings we're getting a day, how many meetings we're getting a week, how many held meetings that we're having, and this is the pipeline that we're producing. And there's make sure you benchmark your indicators, because then what you can do is, once you implement a sales engagement platform, then you can look back, a month from then, 2 months, so on, 6 months, a year, and you can see like the real results. I mean, if the one of the current Forrester reports that are out there, like literally people are buying sales engagement platforms and they're paying for themselves in less than 3 months. And so like it's nuts, it's crazy. But like you don't know that unless you unless you benchmark.
Great, thanks.
And one thing I'd add there, if I may,
sure.
Just from the experience of being at such a large company like VMware, sales engagement platforms, typically you want them to be a mirror of your CRM, right? The CRM is who, the engagement is how. So what I've learned at this bigger company, to get something changed in a CRM sometimes is a lot more difficult than one might think, right? So it's really important to not get pigeonholed into only trying to accomplish things that, from a binary perspective, are measurable unequivocally, because then you run the risk of not actually trying something just because you can't prove it with the data that someone might be asking for, right? So just because you can't put your finger on exactly how much better things are, if you can understand the macros around it, and if those macros align with the goals of the business, if those decisions are based in fundamental business logic, to our organization, that's typically been enough. While it is important that you want to be able to measure the before and after, I just want to mention that don't get caught up in you need to measure everything perfectly. The decisions that you need to make need to be based on sound business logic, and so long as you have that, generally you'll find yourself in a better place moving forward.
That is a great point. When you look at how everybody obsesses today on data-driven this and data-driven that, what you just said resonates with me, and also, the fact that you have to apply common sense to the situation. So that's great. Carlos, anything that you'd like to add? I know you've got some perspectives on the data, analyzing the data, the use of the data, and how you measure success in your organization.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We have the leading indicators as suggested, where we do looking into account engagement, people engagement, we're talking about connections, meaningful conversations. All those are very important, and as mentioned by both Tiran and EJ too, it's about having those benchmarks or establishing some baseline at the very least, because benchmarks, I love benchmarks, but like it or not, they are still a mix of a lot of industries, a lot of different situations. So benchmarks is a good idea, but don't get too stuck into it. That would be at least my personal recommendation. Establish your own benchmarks, starting with a baseline. So those would be the key ones, and then understanding, build your own conversion criteria as well. What are the expectations? How are they getting better? Are they getting worse? And those would be, to me, KPIs that will become very important. Like pre-implementation of this, we had this type of conversions from an inquiry all the way to a qualified opportunity at minimum. And this is what we have today, from an inquiry to the qualified. Once we can show that, then we have that paid off in 3 months kind of scenario that you mentioned, which is ultimately what we all want to be able to showcase. But the other ones to me are not necessarily hard KPIs, are the soft ones, which is situations where, and being a data person, it's hard for me to call anecdotal stories, but they also have some good value, which is then sales, right? Coming back to us, yeah, I love this. I really appreciate having this. Don't ever take this away from me. Or in some situations I had in previous life, somebody was moving from an SDR role to a sales organization, and they didn't have in that sales team yet the tool. They came to me and said, I'll pay out of my pocket, right? This is this is so good for me. This is so beneficial. So I'll pay this out of my pocket, but I want to continue to have this license because it is make a true difference in how I go doing my job. So those are the different type of KPIs, if I may.
I love what you just said. I mean, that's probably the best advertisement or ad that a sales engagement platform company could ever come up with. It doesn't get any more real than that. So that's great. I really appreciate that. So let's touch upon a couple of workflow related terms that I think a lot of people confuse, myself as well. Sales plays and cadences, terms again that sometimes get confused. So Theron, what is a sales play and what are a few examples?
Yeah, it's super similar, and definitely could provide some room for confusion. But when I think about sales plays, sales motions, workflows, I think about outbound, right? If you're going outbound, meaning that you're reaching out to a prospective account, prospective customer, and you're trying to get a meeting with them. That is outbound, all right? There's inbound, there's pipeline plays, right? Like when you have somebody in the pipeline, well, what are the plays that you run to help them make a really great buying decision and hopefully become a customer, right? There's nurturing, there's post-sales plays. Those are when I think about sales plays and motion, that's what I think about. Yeah. And then
Great,
cadences.
thanks for that.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to
Go
talk
ahead.
about. Well, when it comes to like cadences or sequences, there's different terminology there as well. But just think about a cadence of touch points. So on day one, I call somebody. On day 2, I email them. On day 4, I follow up by email. Day 5, I reach out on LinkedIn. Whatever. That's a cadence, a sequence of touch points that I'm executing as a salesperson.
Great, thanks for that. And Carlos, and as we all know, cadence is a huge subject. It could take up a whole webinar, but I think you had an interesting mindset and philosophy around cadences. There's some people that swear by certain cadences that are proven by science and all that. It seems like in your organization, you had more of a collaborative approach to experimenting and figuring out what worked there. Can you speak about that for a moment?
Sure. It's I think in many ways it's almost like the benchmark comment that I just made, right? Like we're all going to see, if you search, you're going to see like, this is the best cadence for this type of play, or this is the best cadence for this other place type of play. And they are normally really good cadences themselves. But what we found is like, especially at the beginning, like there is, because it's automation, because it's a new toy, if I may, like the Flash, the new toy there, there is a tendency for us to perhaps step our knowledge and our understanding of the process, because it ultimately is the process, and the tool just facilitates that process. So we might start with already like a 6 touch, 7 touch, 8, 14 touches cadences, and if it doesn't work, it's harder for us to understand why it's not working. Or if it does work, it makes it even harder to replicate down the road, because you might repeat the same cadence for a different scenario, and then you don't get the same result. And I was like, oh, I wonder what happened. So my usual approach is like, yeah, read as much as you can, learn as much as you can, try to get as close to your business model as possible, because a lot of those cadences don't necessarily reflect your industry, your company, your culture. So all those would be very important factors there and variables. So I always recommend, and have been the team that I have worked with have been successful in building those cadences up. We start a little bit more simple, more nimble with 3 touches, 4 touches, and then build a second one and fourth. And as Tyrone mentioned as well, understand like the type of play. So as well, like start with 1 or 2 plays rather than trying to have 5 to 6 different plays at once, because there's plenty of literature around it. So you can build it on paper, but when it comes to execution, that's what I much rather start working with that collaboration, with more iterations and the learnings that we got from these iterations to build to that point. But again, we're not talking about 6 months, 12 months. No, we're talking about like weekly, almost kind of iterations, then learning and then moving forward and progress.
I just want to highlight, Carlos, I think you really like hit it on the head. Like you got to start small and think about what decisions do you want to make differently in the future based on something that you might learn from what you're doing right now. So instead of trying to boil the whole ocean, right, if you want to understand which kind of subject lines get more opens, you don't necessarily need to come up with 32 different sequences or cadences, right? You just need 1 to prove the point, get the data, and then execute, right? So decide what you want to learn, execute on that, make that decision differently, evaluate it, and then make another decision differently.
Then learn something new. The basic of experimentation, right? So that's
And
Great.
this
so we've got
strategy. Oh, sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
Oh, Go ahead. I was going to say we've got about 10 to 12 minutes left, and we've got a few more questions to go through. And of course, we have the raffle as well, and we want to take some questions. But yeah, Theron, if it's brief, let's hear what you have to say on that.
Oh, just real quick, if you're just starting out with sales engagement, and this varies depending on the size of your team, but like if you're just starting out, someone asked me yesterday, well, how many cadences do I need? Like if you're just starting out, you need to ask yourself a question around outbound. How many buyer personas are you reaching out to? Because the verbiage you use with your buyer personas can be different. It's not all one canned message, right? So this person had like 3 different buyer personas. I said, okay, you need 3 outbound sequences. You need at least 1 inbound sequence because you're going to get inbound at some point, right? And then you need 2 different follow-up sequences. One needs to be when you go to schedule a meeting, you need to have a follow-up sequence so they don't fall through the cracks, and you need to have another generic one for just if you're going back and forth with someone so they don't fall through the cracks. And then you need to have a nurturing sequence where you're nurturing people if they're not ready to buy. So I would say like those are the core that you need to have if you're just starting out.
Okay, and that sounds great. And so let's touch a little bit on content. To me, content seems like the fuel. Content and messaging, kind of the same thing. So maybe in like a minute and a half or so, Carlos, what are your thoughts on the process of developing content? Maybe let's say 2 minutes. How does that happen? Who's involved?
Again, depends a lot on the team that you have available, but I would say obviously involve the product team or product marketing team, the sales team, and again, the salespeople. Like that's going back to the whole conversation between marketing and sales alignment as a marketer. Those are normally where the best ideas come from for content, because they are more often than not the ears and the eyes on the street, right? So they hear, they talk to customers, they hear the complaints, they see what's working, what's not working, they hear about the competitors. So what they have there is good, what is bad. So there is a lot of content that is untapped there. So that's how I would normally, and that's how I usually do start. Like obviously publications and other digital channels very important, but I usually start there, and then try to implement into the iteration kind of a mode again to see if the content starts, and even the format of the content is very interesting. Quickly one, because I know EJ has some really good ideas there too, but I remember talking to the BDR team once. We realized that what made it very important, we no longer had the 45 minutes to 60 minutes webinars. We started doing 20 minutes webinars, because a lot of our BDRs say, like, if I could just condensate everything they need to say in 20 minutes, kind of a mini demo, value prop, everything, I'll get 200 people sign up for it. And we did it, right? And it was extremely successful. It became like almost like the landmark for how the BDR team. So it was a content specifically created for and curated for the BDR and SDR team. So I really think that can be that interesting interaction internally.
Awesome, thanks for that. Now, Theron, your company, obviously one of your core offerings is you help consult with companies on content, from small companies to $50, $60 billion companies like SAP. So let's have your perspective here, if we can, in a minute or two.
Yeah, you mean like just on the way that you structure cadences?
Just just at a top level content strategy, and we'll drill down on the details in a subsequent webinar.
Here's the thing that people make a mistake on when they buy sales engagement, is that they buy sales engagement, and I should. There's a little caveat to this. It isn't a mistake. If you buy sales engagement just for outbound, that's okay, but you're going to miss out. That's my point, is that, and the reason why you can miss out is that, like, EJ's nodding his head, he knows this, like if you don't think about the other sales plays and motions that your sales team is doing, and make sure that you get those sales plays into the form of content and into your sales engagement platform, then guess what? Like, your reps aren't going to be able to execute those other sales plays. They're just going to use it to do outbound. So what happens is like, and this is just a classic example, but like salespeople like myself, we have, in our brains, we have these sales plays. And so if you have, let's say, for instance, all of my nurture plays, instead of being in my sales engagement platform, I just have in my brain or have in some spreadsheet or have like in some Word doc somewhere. Guess what? Like it's almost, I'm gonna go on a limb here, but in this day and age with sales engagement platforms, it's almost selfish because I am using that for myself, but the team doesn't get to benefit from the collective experiences and expertise of everybody else. And so that content needs to get into the sales engagement platform. And many times what we see is people just do outbound and they forget about pipeline plays and the other stuff. And that's just like in the brains of their sales reps. And you can never get the data that you really want if you don't do that. So.
That sounds great. Thanks. And EJ, if you were to give somebody one piece of advice when they're starting out, based on your experience, what would that be?
Geez, one piece of advice. There may be a couple. There may be 1A, B, and C in here, but I think it's important to start small. Right? Be very deliberate with the decisions you make and the intended future desired outcomes. Formulate those hypotheses. I want to be better in this way, and this way. And build your content, build your strategy to align to that, create good periods of time to then evaluate and iterate. I think it's really important to identify the lowest form of broken behavior that causes people to not follow processes. Because otherwise what happens is you just continue to build a sales engagement platform on a wobbly foundation of processes that are broken. Let's say if the data entry is incorrect. So really look for the lowest form of broken something. Don't let your sales work hard attitude that got a lot of us where we are today. Don't let that outshine, because sales engagement is all about working smart. It's not necessarily about working hard, right? And we in sales get too caught up in, hey, let's work hard to get through it. Let's endure. Let's make more calls, right? Sales engagement is about getting further by applying less effort, right? Scaling out efficiency. So identify those broken behaviors, fix them, and don't brush them under the rug.
Thanks. That's a great answer. And Carlos, how about you? You've been involved with implementation sales engagement platforms at 3 companies now. What one piece of advice would you give somebody starting out?
If I had a meme, it would be like what he said, right? So just pointed to EJ. But yeah, everything that he just said, like I absolutely echo that. And I would say that bring that, and we mentioned again, so he's reinforcing that, but bring that a learning mindset. I think that's basically what it is. Like there is a lot that we might start with the platform as like, oh, this is just a way to amplify the sales motion. But there is a lot that we will learn through that. And if we start that way, with that learning mindset, it will be a tremendous win for the whole organization, because it's a different way to approach, as Diron mentioned as well. And it's just not a prospecting tool. It's not at all. It's the full buyer journey. Can and should be leveraged as such, kind of a platform. So if we start that way with a more curious mindset, but also understanding that this is good and should be leveraged for other paths rather than just prospecting, I would recommend that. But what EJ said.
Okay. Awesome. All right, EJ, you get double score there. So let's just.
Does that mean I'm getting one of the gift cards, or?
Double. So let's rapid fire take 2 or 3 questions from the audience here. So let's see. So Jonathan Moreski has a really good question. How do you ensure a clean, efficient handoff between sales and marketing, MQLs and SQLs? Somebody want to take that in 30 seconds?
Can you repeat?
Sorry.
Establishing really important benchmarks as to when sales receives and keeps, how long they receive and keep that prospect, and when they are to give that prospect back to marketing. Without really good bumpers around when those decisions are made, if those lines are blurred, I mean, nothing else will work, right? Because then your inbound becomes outbound, your outbound becomes inbound, and then all of a sudden your CRM and your engagement platform is the Wild West.
Competing, yeah. They should never compete. I would agree with that. Like they
great.
should complement each other. It's about complementing.
Criteria is important too. just criteria.
That's about it.
If you have the right criteria defined, then you can use your sales engagement platform to create triggers that'll make that even a smoother process for you.
That's exactly. Yeah, and that's it. Like I think it's clarity, right? Like it ultimately comes down to what it needs to be very clear between sales and marketing. Who does what and when in that sandbox, right? What our roles and responsibilities are within that sandbox. I think that's what makes it help. Otherwise, it becomes very blurry, and then it becomes blurry. The result's not going to be it's not going to be good for anybody, and actually, the customer is going to end up paying the price, which is the worst case scenario. Like I'm seeing on the chat here, there are a lot of questions that are not answered, and there's opportunity here. But feel free to reach out to me. I don't want to put words on Tiran's and EJ's mouth, but on LinkedIn or any other tools, like we'll be happy to engage, right, with anybody of our peers. Like that's all the audience here today. So we'll be happy to answer as many questions as possible, or at least refer you to somebody who is probably smarter than me in some of the areas.
That may not be possible.
It is.
So to be smarter. So, all right, that sounds great. So, we still is there anything on chat here that we want to take? Just looking through, I've been most of these questions. It looks like many of these.
There was one question in there that really piqued my interest. I think it was David who mentioned it. It was just about getting adoption from older, more tenured reps that are maybe set in their ways. Maybe they've found their path to success and it didn't have anything to do with SalesLoft, Ring DNA, or outreach. How do you get the adoption? And it's definitely something that we've experienced. We've certainly gotten it's a little bit easier to get adoption out of the younger reps who are trying to forge their own path, trying to find their own sales voice. So the way we've found some success in getting some adoption from a little bit more tenured reps is just making sure that we don't necessarily just give them everything exactly the same as we give some of the younger reps, right? Give those older reps who are more tenured, give them content, give them resources they will actually use, not necessarily the content and resources that you have to complete and produce to check the box to make it seem like your job's done. I put the content and everyone has it. Think about what are they actually going to use? How does it actually fit into their workflow? And don't let your work hard attitude kind of shine through that to say, oh no, they'll definitely do this. They'll definitely do that. Understand the audience, understand what, how they make their decisions, and create a smaller collection of content, a little bit more dedicated for those individuals in particular.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. All right, this sounds great. And lastly, Constance asked about, is there a checklist for choosing a sales tool? We don't have that. We're vendor neutral, but we may have a webinar coming up in the February-March timeframe for a services organization that focuses on that. And so if that's the case, we'll be sure to answer that question for you, have that addressed for you, Constance. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. This has been great for me, and hopefully it has been for you as well. And again, thanks very much to our panelists, EJ, Theron, and Carlos, for graciously taking your time to help educate myself for sure, and the audience as well. Thanks again now. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care now. Bye.